Hi, I'm Eli Berman. I'm here from UC San Diego, where I'm an economist. I'm also a research director at the University of California's Institute on Global Conflict and Cooperation, IGCC. IGCC does a lot of things. It started doing nuclear non-proliferation work and has now branched out to the environment, to global health issues. My particular responsibility is studying development in conflict areas, terrorism, insurgency, things like that. IGCC is a multi-campus research unit, which means that I'm in charge of coordinating research across all 10 UC campuses. There are 10 of them, and 2 national laboratories that we're also affiliated with. It's often the case that there isn't a critical mass on one campus on a particular topic, but when you look at the whole UC, not only is there a critical mass, we're actually the world leaders. In development in conflict areas, between Ted's work and the work that's being done by lots of people around different campuses, we really are a world leader. And so we're natural partners for SIGA in this event, and I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, Ted and Teminot, for bringing us here. Today I want to talk about, or Joe and I would like to talk about studying conflict in a particular setting, which was work that we're doing that we've done and which is ongoing in Iraq and in Afghanistan. And so, so here we are, same 2 guys. This is a place called Chamkhani. It's on the Pakistani border. And what were we doing there? Well, what I'd like to do is this. We're gonna allow Joe to motivate the question. So on the evidence to action theme, I bring you Dr. Joe Felter, Special Forces Colonel, Stanford PhD in political science, somebody who had the ability to bring researchers to bear on serious problems that involved life or death, literally, in a development context where there was a conflict going on, and had also the ability, I can't think of anybody else who's been so good at translating the needs of people who have urgent problems in development conflict to language that researchers can understand, and then allowing the researchers to come in, give answers, evidence, and then translate them into action by turning back and translating in the other direction to the policymakers who can actually make a difference. We're going to talk about 2 examples, one that has to do with civilian casualties, and another that has to do with development in conflict zones. So, Joe.
Thanks, Eli. You want to flip that one? Sorry. Well, thanks a lot, Eli, and thanks, Ted and SIGA, for a chance to be here. This is just quite an organization. You've stood up doing some great work, and I'm really, really privileged and honored to be here. The picture we were going to use was Eli on a horse riding on a little trail on the Pakistani border. No kidding, and I'm sorry that his modesty got the best of him, but it's a fantastic picture. But we'll go with this one. Well, I'd like to start out, as Eli introduced me, to tell you a couple of stories. We'll start with one, and that deals with the challenges we faced in trying to reduce civilian casualties in Afghanistan. So let me begin with a little vignette. This was spring of 2010 at ISAF headquarters, the International Security Assistance Force headquarters in Kabul. Then General Stanley McChrystal was the commander of ISAF at the time, and every evening we would have a commander's update, and part of that in the schedule you would have your opportunity to tell the commander something he needs to know. And there's a lot of pressure. Everyone's watching. Every outstation across the country is listening in. There's people in the Pentagon watching. This is video teleconference everywhere. And it's a big deal. If you show up unprepared, you'll know about it. And briefing that day was a woman, about 30 years old, named Radha Iyengar from the London School of Economics, talking on the topic of civilian casualties. And she walks up there to a room full of largely of military men, and a few civilians and a couple women, but she just looked a little bit out of place, and everyone was very suspicious of what's this woman going to tell us about a topic like civilian casualties in combat that we need to know. And leading up to this, when General McChrystal took over as commander, he really tried to shift the mindset of the force in ISAF forces in Afghanistan to shift from really recognize this as a population-centric counterinsurgency, meaning that protecting the population really was one of the priorities, if not the center of gravity in this kind of fight. And certainly most of the military members, from the coalition and certainly the US, their professional training was, as military members, was, hey, you close with and destroy the enemy. You mass firepower and objectives, you destroy the enemy's army in the field, you take terrain, you take cities, and you go home. Obviously, this is a very different fight. But at this time, this was probably, I think, at the time, the highest level of violence that we'd have experienced in the fight to this point here in 2010. But General McChrystal was introducing these tactical directives, these escalation of force standard operating procedures, and other measures to try to reduce the number of civilian casualties that we experienced as part of operations. And he had this gut feeling, given the goals and objectives of counterinsurgency, of population, given his goals and objectives, that protecting the population was key. And it was left to a number of folks to go down around theater and try to impress upon these subordinate commanders, hey, you need to protect civilians and do everything within your power to reduce civilian casualties. And to be clear, and I want to make this point because General McChrystal, I think, has been misinterpreted and misquoted a number of times. He never asked anyone in ISAF not to defend themselves or not to shoot back. He made it very clear that if we're going to win this fight, certainly it's right on the moral level, reducing civilian casualties and collateral damage, but it's strategically we cannot prevail in this struggle if we inflict civilian casualties and collateral damage. It just wasn't going to work. But it was hard. We had to go down and commanders, if anyone of you, probably a few people in this room have been in a situation where you've got to protect people that you're responsible for. You may be taking fire from a house in a village in Afghanistan, and you've got the power to take that house down and prevent your soldiers from taking fire and from getting killed and wounded. And there's a huge incentive and visceral drive in you as a commander I'm going to take that house down and protect my men. And General McChrystal is asking each of these subordinate commanders to say, wait, use restraint, make sure you use you exhaust all other options before you take that house down. And if you are going to take that house down, you will make sure that there are no civilians inside it, as one example. And it's tough. I mean, these are commanders who routinely write letters home to families of loved ones who've been killed and say, I'm sorry, but your son or daughter was killed in a noble cause, and you can't help but feel a certain amount of responsibility as a commander. So I just can't overemphasize how hard it is to tell a commander to say, hey, use some restraint. Okay, here's some criteria. Here's a more deliberate hierarchy of action that you have to follow before you can employ these type of weapon systems, whether air-delivered, artillery, and whatnot, in the interest of preventing or reducing civilian casualties and collateral damage. So back to the video teleconference with this woman briefing. She presented actually some evidence that was developed from a very methodologically rigorous study of the impact of civilian casualties on violence in Afghanistan at the district level. And this study was made possible by this nexus of academics coming over and supporting the effort, which I'll go into detail in a bit. But let me get back to the conference scene. So everyone's tired. It's late. It's always late, or you've just never got enough sleep there. And after Rada briefs the findings, just when she presents this evidence, General McChrystal, he starts tapping the mic, and everyone looks at him like, "Oh my God, the boss is pissed off. This isn't going to be good." And everyone's a little scared, including me, because I was the one that propped Professor Iyengar up to briefing against everyone's warnings, like you can't put her up in front of the boss like this. But he said, everyone, listen, this is exactly what I've been preaching since I took command. This is evidence of what I've been preaching. We now have evidence that, no kidding, civilian casualties increases violence, and we are going to lose. We're not going to prevail in this fight if we continue to kill civilians and experience collateral damage. And it was just kind of a pause across the room, and you could see the guy sitting in the Pentagon who's all of a sudden awake because he's usually kind of droning because it's 1 in the morning there, his time. And all the subordinate commanders in the field are going, wow, the boss is serious. I mean, it was almost, I think, cathartic for General McChrystal to see. It was a gut feeling that I think everyone shared. Everyone knew that civilian casualties was bad morally and served to undermine our strategic campaign. But here we had some evidence, and for the first time. So how did this college professor show up there? I'll tell you the quick story and turn it back over to Ellie. Okay, so we had this, General McChrystal started this organization called the Counterinsurgency Advisory and Assistance Team, which was something he created as his personal direct report unit that could give him what he wanted or what he called his direct telescope. So he could look down into the formations across the battlefield in Afghanistan and find out what was going on, unfiltered by multiple layers of command, and also get a direct communication channel back to him as far as, hey, what is going on, what are the challenges our troops are experiencing in the field. And it wasn't kind of, you ever played that game as a kid where you tell someone something at the end of the room and it goes through 7 people and it comes out very different? Well, he wanted a direct report to him, and I had the great privilege of working with that organization. And when he started, it was populated mostly by experienced special forces operators, 20, 30 years of experience, great Americans and some coalition forces, very, very, very skilled and experienced in tactical advise and assist kind of missions. But we found that we got on the ground that we need advise and assist commanders on things much beyond the tactical. And so when I got there and I realized that the real problems we were facing, the answers weren't going to be found in these great special forces operators, but they may be found in the heads of folks like Eli Berman and some of our colleagues back in some of our fine institutions here in the United States and elsewhere. And how can we create a mechanism to bring that expertise and that talent to bear? And this is what we did. We stood up what we called as the CAT Academic Research Team, the CART, if you will. And we were able to bring over experts from around academia. There's a few folks here today. Tarragani is here. I think Ben Cross, who's kind of loosely affiliated with us, and will be more, and a few others. And it was it was this mechanism where we could bring the kind of expertise to the table that was needed and provide the evidence that can translate into action. And in this case, this evidence, and I'm going to turn it back over to Elliot to go in a little more detail, but it was no kidding, it kind of validated some of these significant demands that General McChrystal and ISAF leadership was placing on their subordinate commanders and saying, hey, reducing civilian casualties is part of our strategic, plans. It serves our strategic ends, and you need to do it. It's not just a gut feeling. It's real, and here's evidence. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Ellie, and he can present some of the actual findings from this study.
Sure. So this isn't my study, but I have administrative responsibility as the director of the Afghanistan part of a larger network of researchers. Here's the data. So Joe laid out the puzzle beautifully, and the dilemma that American and NATO forces were facing, which Afghan forces faced as well. You want to protect the forces. Commanders have a responsibility to do that. On the other hand, how do you protect the civilians as well? And what's the role of the civilians in the conflict? And the view of many of the soldiers was, my job is to take care of the enemy, not to worry about the civilians. They were trying to change that. The evidence, and this evidence I think made a difference. The evidence looks like this. The circles are civilian casualties, which NATO Afghanistan was doing the best job it could of recording. So an incident means that someone was killed, then they'll count the number of people that were killed and injured in that incident. You can see how they're scattered across Afghanistan. This is during a sample period from January 2009 through March 2010. On the other side, the blocks, each district in Afghanistan has both a circle and a color. The color is the number of significant acts. Those are attacks, mostly IED attacks, improvised roadside bombs. These are attacks suffered by NATO Afghanistan and to some extent Afghan military forces. Now, from a statistical analysis point of view, we did the type of rigorous research that a development economist who's well trained, the way that Ted trains his students and the way that we all train our students would do. I don't want to go into the details, but the answer was basically this. If you look at the top graph, that's the one I want you to focus on. Time zero is when an event occurred, and this is an impulse response, which is to say that from time zero onwards, here is on the vertical the effect on the number of significant actions that were suffered by NATO Afghanistan forces. And what you see is that as you move to the right from time zero, you move off of the zero line and you see an increase in attacks. The full increase would be the integral under that blue line. And so, yes, this was the first evidence available, and General McChrystal was right. It was not only an ethical problem, it was also a strategic problem in the context of the war, so that if the battalion commander thought he was protecting his troops, well, he might be doing it in the short run, but in the long run, he might be really damaging his troops. The outcome here would be, of course, violence reduction. This is a serious matter, both on the civilian side and on the military side. We're talking about lost lives. Now, this fits in a more general framework. Time is short, so all I want to tell you about this is it's complicated. In a sense, how complicated? It's actually more complicated than anything that our Department of Defense, in its glory, has ever really seriously researched or trained on. And so we're sending Americans into the field to try to deal with a complex situation that involves civilian populations, rebels, and governments who have a very complex interaction. USAID is actually a little better at this, at understanding what might be going on in all the aspects of the relationship, and then we're putting troops in the middle of that and asking them to do their job without really training them. And so this is where the social science is necessary. Let me give you, and more of our aid is moving to places like that. Do we have time for one more story? Tamina, where are we on time? Yeah? How are we? Oh, excellent. In that case, wait a moment. This is not just an issue for the US military and for people that are trying to reduce violence in different places. This is an issue for the development community. The places that are well governed are actually doing okay. You know, they're growing and they're thriving in India and China and places like that, Indonesia. They're getting better. If you look at the places on the map, this is DFID, the British version of USAID. The places on the light pink places are the places that they're not sending money to anymore because they don't think they need it, including China and Indonesia. The darker pinky places, I'm missing a word for that color, but I know you know what I'm talking about. Those are the places where money, USAID money, World Bank money, IMF money, DFID money, NGO money is going to increasingly because they're the basket cases. They have development problems combined with governance problems, and the symptoms of those tend to be violent. And then, of course, violence is part of the problem. And so this is a challenge to all of us. Okay, next example, Joe.
Thanks, Eli. Okay, another vignette. So one morning in the fall of 2010, after General Petraeus had taken over command of ISAF, I was in my physical training outfit, and truth be told, I had just watched the Stanford-Oregon game. I had to get up at 4 in the morning to see it, and I just want to say in this Cal crowd, that was the only game that Stanford lost that year, so you can do the math. And the next year, but another story. So I saw General Petraeus, and if you know about his legendary running abilities, it's true, and I've run with him, and I was afraid I got to go run with General Petraeus, and that's going to ruin my morning because I've just been drinking coffee. But in fact, he actually asked me to do something much harder. He said, "Hey Joe, I saw that report that the CAT put together, this organization I was working with, that highlighted some of the challenges with the Commander's Emergency Response Program, which is kind of like it's like a military version of development aid, if you're familiar with that." He said, you pointed out some problems, well, you get what you asked for, you're going to fix it. So he said, "Joe, I want you to fix the program." So I said, I would have rather run 10 miles at a 6-minute pace with him, given how broken the program was. But so what do? I mentioned before we started up this CAT academic research team with folks like Jake Shapiro out of Princeton, Eli Berman here, Mike Callan, who some of you know, and Rod Iyengar and others. I said, wow, this is a job for the A-team of academics that I had this great privilege of knowing. So I immediately called up Eli Berman and Jake Shapiro. I said, guys, we need help. General Petraeus wants us to fix CERP, and the data's poor, the problems are large, and the in-house expertise that we had to draw on there was lacking. I mean, we're focused on what we call the 50-meter targets. It's doing this kind of research, it just can't happen with our organic assets forward in theater, despite a lot of hard work and a lot of effort by those involved. So we brought Eli and Jake over. We introduced some good research techniques, did a survey, collected data, realized the data was poor and non-existent. We leveraged some findings from another study that we did on a similar topic, assessing CERP effectiveness in Iraq, which some of you may be familiar with, that Eli and Jake and I worked on. So we brought a lot of expertise to the table. And it culminated after about a month's work, into a full-on, close to 90-minute briefing with General Petraeus and all the subordinate leaders of ISAF and U.S. Forces Afghanistan. They're waiting for, how are we going to fix CERP? And I tell you, I had some, despite all these great special operators I had working with me, the people I brought to the table were, our A team. In this case, Eli had just left because he did have another life back in La Jolla, but transitioned with Jake Shapiro, and we presented a very theoretically informed, methodologically supported, sound and evidence-based assessment of the program, and made some very specific recommendations on how we might fix this program. And a lot of them centered on, at what level CERP needed to be approved at what level, how much money you can put at what levels. But basically, we learned from previous research in Iraq and learned as much as we could on the fly with this last month of intensive research on the ground in Afghanistan. And briefed it all the way up the chain before you get to General Petraeus, of course. And I witnessed Eli's, just providing some amazing briefings to some of the 1 and 2 and 3 stars. But they were a brief from General Petraeus, and General Petraeus is a brilliant person. And since I met him when he was my social sciences professor at West Point, when he was Major Petraeus, and I've been just intimidated by him ever since. So he doesn't give anything away. He's very astute. He's very critical. But when he sees something, when it's compelling, when it's well researched, well supported, he acts. And we had 10 recommendations, and going point by point, he said yes, yes, yes. And we actually, because I think of this effort, championed by folks like Eli and Jake and others, we were able to bring some evidence to the table, make a compelling assessment and recommendation, and translate it into a change in how we actually disperse this aid into the field, which is a very important part of our counterinsurgency effort. And again, I'll hand it over to Eli to provide some of the findings from this study.
See the challenge of sharing a stage with this guy? So I don't have time for anecdotes, so I'll go straight to data. So again, complex setup. You've got a government, and really the ally of the government is providing some services to a civilian population and in the background is the idea that if you do this for the civilian population, they'll stop supporting rebels, mostly with information, or they'll provide more information to these folks, which will allow this conflict between the government and the rebels to go better. Now, actually modeling that, thinking that through, that's actually quite hard. I think we've started to crack that now, and we've got a couple of papers which I think are fairly convincing, but it's hard stuff. It's very hard to explain to the people that are trying to implement this. Though we've worked with some incredibly dedicated people who have amazing experience at trying to solve this problem of the conflict and this problem of keeping the civilian population getting services in the midst of a conflict. This is serious stuff. Evidence. Well, we knew a lot from Iraq already. So when my country invades another country, they collect a lot of data, let me tell you. So what you're looking at here is the time series on a monthly basis of significant acts, which I explained before, for each of the 104 districts of Iraq. We could have done this on an hour-by-hour basis by geolocator. Geolocator, this room is about a geolocator, right? That's the quality of data that comes out of this conflict is like, for a labor economist, it's like pig in mud. But it's a serious business. What we found was that it is illustrated here. CERP, this is Commander's Emergency Response Program funding. This is funding that, let me tell one anecdote. When the troops rolled into Baghdad, it turned out that there was gold left in the palace that Saddam hadn't moved fast enough. They called the White House and said, what do we do with this $2 billion of gold? The White House said, actually there was an economist there at the time, who said, well, you give it back to the central bank so they can run their monetary policy. And the response was, well, excuse me, sir, that's not actually what we're going to do. What we're going to do is this is found money, we can do what we want with it. We're going to run development programs because Congress doesn't usually allow us to do that. That's USAID's responsibility, but we would like to be able to do more of it, and so that's what we're going to do. And so they set up this thing called the Commander's Emergency Response Program, and they gave out money in small amounts to battalion commanders, brigade commanders, sometimes even to company commanders, kind of thinking of them as walking around with wads of cash and checkbooks to to get Iraqi contractors to do work. This is dig wells, pave roads, paint schools, things like that. What you find is that most of the reconstruction money that went into Iraq over the first 5 years of the war, maybe 30-something billion dollars, the vast majority of that did not have any violence-reducing effect, no matter what we thought the theory was. This small-scale funding, take a look at this middle panel, had a strong violence-reducing effect. These are SIG acts, significant actions, attacks on the vertical, and this is spending on CERP spending on the horizontal. This is especially true after this period that we call the surge, and it's even more true the smaller the project. Okay? And so we knew a lot going into to brief General Petraeus already. Another thing that's very interesting in Iraq is that there's a complementarity between the force level, the ability to do coercion, and the level of development. The forces are more effective at reducing violence when there's a development project in place, and the development projects are more effective when the forces are in place. We didn't know that when we went to do the briefing, but we know it now. And so, now think about this from a researcher's point of view. Usually, research doesn't happen very fast. You define a question, you set up a study, maybe you do a really well-designed experiment, it takes you a couple of years to run, you write it up, it's another year, you try to, and you wait for it to be published, and in the meantime, maybe you try to convince some policymakers that it would be a good idea to try to maybe do it a little more this way instead of that way. We're talking about 4 or 5 years, You measure this as between sabbaticals, how you affect policy. The story that Joe is telling you, we got the call in late August to come and see if maybe we could help with the design of how CERP was being managed in Afghanistan. Everything that he told you was done by the middle of November. We went out, we ran a survey, and we figured out what they were doing wrong or right. We had Joe's team. Joe was running something with a very large budget. Maybe I won't share exactly this. So he had people running around all over Afghanistan, drawing information and explaining to people how to do their job better. And so we drew all the information, we designed a survey, we briefed on it, they changed the way they do business, and Joe's team went out and explained to the practitioners how they could do their jobs better, and all that happened, I think, by mid-December. Yeah. So in terms of the decision cycles and the action cycles of the US military, it might have other faults, but you get to influence decisions very, very quickly. Now there's another aspect. Adam, are you here? Oh, excellent, okay. There's another aspect of this, which in some sense is the most gratifying. Every once in a while, you meet one of these brave, dedicated Americans who's well-trained and trying to do good, and every once in a while they take the time, even though they don't sleep enough, to write you a letter and say, hey, it really changed the way I work. Adam, could you come talk for a few minutes? So I want to introduce to you Adam Potter, who's a Marine captain, or now in the reserves, and he can tell you how it is that he took the evidence and turned it into action, if you would.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick, but I've been doing civil affairs, which means that I've been working with populations both in Iraq and in Afghanistan. And the first few experiences in Iraq was very similar to with CERP expenditures, where we'd get into an area, we'd make entrance, and then we'd be able to start spending some money with the hope that, with development and with the government being able to provide opportunities for prosperity, eventually the people would join our sides, and they'd look to the insurgency as futility. And what I was getting was, the first round of money would lead to violence, just like what Eli had pointed out. And so we'd identify who was providing that violence, and we'd include them into the decision-making process. And then we'd get another surge of violence, because the prior entitled group would start trying to take them out. So there was some competition there. And after about 3 or 4 iterations, we get to the point where, okay, we know who feels entitled to this kind of power and decision-making, and the violence would smooth out over time. And that was kind of the pattern that I was used to. And when we get into Afghanistan, which was the same time period when Joe and Eli were there in 2009, 2010, the CERP process wasn't so quick, and it was very slow. So we'd get access to an area, we'd start setting up these multi-million-dollar programs to roll out to the population and get their support, but the money was slow. And I thought, oh no, the population is going to rebel against us. They're going to get, very upset. We're going to face some violent repercussions. And no, didn't happen. We had peace. And the longer the money took, the more I was able to realize, hey, maybe it was the money that was causing this violent competition. And eventually, after about 6 months, the same organization identification that I was doing in Iraq, where these are the people who are the decision makers, we were able to do that in Afghanistan, and without doing the money and without doing the violence. So by the time we did get the funding, we were able to introduce it more methodically. And again, we had the same amount of money, but no violence afterwards. So we were discovering this stuff in parallel to what their research was turning out. And as a result, I was able to combine their research with my experiences as a USAID stability advisor. And really, we can talk about anecdotal evidence, but when we bring out their research and their facts to couple it, it's a very strong message that, don't roll out the money. Don't think that you're going to buy hearts and minds. You really need to organize, identify who these people are before you do that.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll wrap up real quick. Thanks, Adam. We got the faces blurred out. I guess we don't have to worry about me going back anytime soon. Well, thanks. I'm going to just conclude here and get to some questions. But this picture here is down in northwestern Kandahar, a little village called Kakrez. And I was down there for an extended visit, checking out what we call the Village Stability Operations, which is a U.S. Special Forces-led. Thanks for the warning. Got it. Okay, 5 minutes. And I want to contrast. So I met this guy, Mike, he's a Special Forces captain, mid-20s, just an amazing person, as so many of these young men and women serving today are, Adam included. And I contrasted with what his challenges were as a young officer, recently out of a commissioning program, with what mine were coming out of West Point at the end of the Cold War, where combat wasn't easy, but it was simple to understand. I mean, you think back then, you knew where the enemy was, what they looked like. They wore uniforms. You operated in large formations. There's, you kind of got online and you said, okay, enemy this way, and you'll know them when you see them. And so again, not easy, but similar to understand the threat environment. These days, the threat environment that Adam entered and that so many young men and women are entering in these last 10 years, very different. So, example, the village stability operations. This guy Mike had to go in there. His mission was, hey, go into this village and develop these villages and connect them to their district government and build support for the government at the bottom level up. And to do that, you're going to have to fight your way in. They were heavily attacked when they went into this village. They had to wrest control from the Taliban, night litters and everything. They had to protect people like this young guy right here in the middle. They had to bring in development programs. They had to work across the interagency, across coalition, NGOs. I mean, it was a complex fight. And this guy's 26 years old. He's got 10 guys like him, figure it out. So very complex environment. And what we're finding is a lot of the tough questions just exceed the capacity of even a great guy like this and his team. We're asking just a little too much. They're overmatched, if you will. And the more that we can bring, now more than ever, we need to bring the kind of expertise to the tip of the spear, if you will, forward in these conflict zones, and they need it, and they need it now. So let me just wrap up with a few slides, and then because I know I'm going to get the hook there. I got my 2-minute hook now. So here's Eli Berman there staring into Pakistan from the border. Really an example of, you talk about limiting that flash to bang, that I've got a good idea that can matter. Let's get it into the decision-making process. He's briefing special forces team leaders, company commanders right there, on the spot. It was a great sight to see. I was very proud of him for that. There's a number. I mean, first of all, let me a shout out to SEG on all the great work they're doing here, and it's just amazing the impact that you are having and the potential you can have. And I just want to highlight a few other organizations that our broader group is working with. Here's the Empirical Studies of Conflict Project, which a number of folks here are a part of, and we're operating in a few different countries around the world. And again, inspired, I think, by the same call to action that Ted and SEG is. You're just trying to get smarter about these problems, bring evidence to the table, and to make better decisions. Here's some folks you might recognize here. Tarek Ghani, who's with us, Mike Cowan, Ellie, and others. Luke Conner, who's out at Pittsburgh now. in action there in Afghanistan, helping with the project. And Mike Cowan again at Assure out in western Afghanistan near, in the Zeriko Valley, working with another village stability operation. So it's getting out to the field, it's taking the risks, getting where you need to be to make a difference, both to collect data and provide the insights that are needed. We're going to have a website that should be live here within a month or so, and I hope to push that out to the broader community, and Ted's been a good resource for help with this. IGC, again, many are familiar with this, with the UC system. Ellie's been doing a lot of work with this. Another great organization that's up and running now, and you can log on and see some of the great work that they're doing. Let me just finish with one more minute. So when I was in the military, so many weeks ago, I'd go in a uniform. I'd go to airports in uniform, and it was very heartening. People would come up and say, "Hey, thank you for your service. Thank you for what you were doing." And I felt a little humble because I knew so many people that were doing so much more, but I thank them for their support. And what I want to say now is I think everyone in this room recognizes the problems that we're experiencing in these conflict areas. I personally don't think that history is going to smile too well on our intervention in Afghanistan, but I tell you, we're going to be facing these types of problems for years, over and over. How to, better conditions, improve the human condition, bring development into war-torn conflict areas. And to do it, it's not going to be, guys that look like this guy on your right, people in uniform. We got good warfighters out there. It's going to be, people that are, people like in this room. So I just want to thank everyone here for getting involved. This is hard work. If you're doing research downrange, it's dangerous. It's hard work, and everyone here, I think, appreciates what's at stake. There's a lot at stake. It's life and death. And to turn the tide, I think it's going to come from ideas, and folks like Ellie and Ted and many of you here. So thank you for your service. Thank everyone here who supports organizations like this, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great presentation, and it makes intuitive sense. I wonder how the military is using the kind of data you're providing in a specific decision-making instance. And I throw out a couple. Remember, Senator Kerry said that we had outsourced the pursuit of bin Laden and didn't go into Tora Bora with our troops. Well, there's obviously quid pro quos there for our forces and others. And another one is the controversial decisions about drone strikes. In the sense they've obviously hit some very important targets, but there have been civilian casualties. You're bringing hard data. How do they utilize those in evaluating that kind of decision?
Well, I'll take a stab. I would say it's mixed. Okay, I don't think we don't have a dedicated mechanism to take the findings, the methodologically rigorous findings from quality scholars like we have in this room and putting it right into the mix. I would say it's a lot of it hinges on some special senior leaders to tell you what it comes down to that. Sometimes you've got these visionaries, folks like General Petraeus, folks like General Mike Flynn, who's now running the Defense Intelligence Agency, who actually pushed the rules a bit and allowed us to use some data that was sanitized and aggregated. But the short answer to your question, it's hit and miss. There's nothing institutionalized, and I think there's a great need for organizations like SIGA, like some of the other organizations of quality scholars working on these tough problems to communicate those findings right into the policymaking process. So I think you just identified a real need, and I think there's folks in this room are trying to be part of the solution going forward. So the short answer is it's hit and miss sometimes to great effect, and sometimes you see decisions that are made that wow, that's just any grad student could have told you that wasn't very smart. So I think all of us here are involved in that effort to make sure we're smart about our toughest problems, are doing good work.
Our graduate students would have known this. Even would have said something strong.
Question in the back.
Okay. This a simple question. The first example, you told us that the basic principles of operation is something happened, you attack without paying attention to what will be the side effects. Now, to me at least, I wouldn't really think that you need to do an empirical analysis to know about some concepts that are called revenge. If you kill someone, brother, there is a probability that they will kill you. To what extent people in the military have some basic training about the fact that people respond to bad things that happen to them, and to what extent a lot of the doctrines are basically done without really taking into account behavioral stuff. The thing that I speak is not that I was a soldier at the time, really think that the military is stupid. The reason that I think is how much basic theory enter to things and how much you need to reinvent the wheel by doing little empirical study to restate the obvious.
So I was a soldier too at one point, so let me try to answer from a full perspective. To me, even with military training, it was very surprising to learn that grievances and people being angry about things is actually a very poor predictor of violence and insurgency. So the simple psychological theory that dictates interhuman relations at an individual level is almost useless in explaining why insurgencies get organized or why we see attacks at any particular time. What seems to be going on is much subtler, but not unfamiliar, I think, when you think about it, which is that the success of an insurgency or of coercive force on the government's part hinges on the cooperation of non-combatants in providing or not providing information to one side or the other. Because the insurgents really can't operate without making noise and people knowing what they're up to. And so it's not so much that people seek revenge, and then act out of anger. It seems to be more that people withhold information that they could use to protect the patrol if they decide that it's not in their interest anymore, that they'd rather have somebody else controlling the neighborhood. Did I answer the question?
To some extent, no, I agree with you, but the question, aren't these things relatively obvious from 2,000 years of human existence that you now need to have, there is a lot of role to empirical studies, for example, to quantify things. For example, what are the probabilities that something happens? But to know that things like this exist, you don't need to wait to economists to do an experiment where human history documented these things for many times in the past.
Some people think this is intuitive in retrospect, some people don't. Some people, and much of the training that goes into many of the people that are fighting these wars doesn't involve how you treat civilians at all. And in fact, the Sri Lankans, it suppressed an insurgency along lines that were totally Stalinist, that ignored how you treated the civilian population. There is another way of doing it. In fact, that's what the Russians did in Afghanistan.
I just want to break. We have just a few more minutes for questions. So is there another question? Up here in the front, we have a question.
Hi, my name's Sarah Lockhart from UC Davis. And I just had a question about some of the data that you showed, the really great data. And as somebody who studies conflict, I know how hard it is to get data. Is there any way that this is shared with scholars that aren't working directly with these projects? Or how do we get that data? Or is there any plan in the future? I know some of this is very immediate stuff that might not be shared. But is there a way to kind of share this type of data and work together? Thanks.
Sure. Great question. We call that a softball question. Yes, and this project that we're calling the Empirical Studies of Conflict Project was inspired by someone just like you. We want to basically lower the barriers to getting involved in this kind of work by making data public good, by going out there doing the hard work of collecting data, of leveraging relationships within the finding opportunities to bring data that's normally sensitive, classified, disaggregating, or just aggregating, sanitizing, trying to bring it out into a format, doing what would take a grad student the first 3 years of the program to before he or she starts writing, making it available right now. And this is this Empirical Studies of Conflict project is one of other efforts out there. But this website will be going live in June, and you'll be able to go to at least access a number of our initial cases. I guess I lost it, but. So the short answer is yes, and that's exactly your question speaks to exactly the motivation, inspiration for this project, and what I hope to continue now that I've transitioned from the military to champion along with my colleagues, Jake Shapiro at Princeton, Eli Berman, Jeremy Weinstein down at Stanford, David Layton, Jim Fearon, and others. So it's, we want to make this, analysis is only as good as the data that goes into it, and policy is driven by this analysis. So, and people's lives are at stake. So I'm very inspired to try to stay involved in this effort to make, democratize data, conflict data, and make it available more broadly. So thanks for that lead-up question.